Hello, BookTube. I've got another starter kit for you today, this time dealing with ancient Greece, which by some weird combination of events I have never done before. So we're going to do that. We're going to do a starter kit for ancient Greece. But before we do that, again, I want to issue a brief prefatory remark, this time dealing with the kind of people who tend to come out of the woodwork when one talks about ancient Greece, especially, but also ancient Rome. And that type of person is unbearably fingernails on chalkboard pretentious. So I am doing a starter kit here of ancient Greece. And if you are tempted halfway through this starter kit or at the end of this starter kit to leave a comment saying that no starter kit of ancient Greece is complete or even halfway competent unless it includes a long mention of the 2 fragmentary lines of Lysippus of Argon, kindly don't. Kindly don't leave that comment. I'm going to delete it anyway. Kindly don't leave that comment. I understand that when ancient Greece is mentioned, you feel, those of you who are, I'm hoping no one's watching that's like this, but if you feel the urge to suddenly take a trip to the well, actually, I understand that can feel unbearable, but please resist it in my case. So now that that's out of the way, now that prefatory note is out of the way, if, as the kids say, you flex in the comments of this video, I will delete your comment. So you will be wasting your time. So don't do it. Now we can move on to the starter kit itself. And the starter kit itself is big. Most of my starter kits are not. This one is. Because the culture of ancient Greece is incredibly important to Western civilization. Second, maybe only to the Enlightenment. Some of the concepts, some of the world view ideas that the Greeks hatched out of almost nothing are the foundations of the way we all look at the world. And so for a starter kit of ancient Greece, we need to go where all of that starts and where also all of Western literature starts. And that is Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, I have a picture here pulled from the internet. This is, I believe, one of those remainder classics that will probably be the Butcher and Lang prose translation or something like that of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'm not choosing a particular translation here because, as I've said many times before on this channel, that will depend on you. Find a translation that works for you, that you can live with for the number of pages that you're dealing with. And then even if it ends up that you pick a translation that the scholarly consensus says is not particularly good, you will at least be in the room when that happens. You will be able to move, once you learn that, and you see some of the deficiencies pointed out to you, you can move on to some other translation that is renowned to be better. But the key thing at first is that the translation agree with you. So start with whatever translation agrees with you for the Iliad and the Odyssey, but you do need to read them for an ancient Greek starter kit. I would argue that you need to read them for any starter kit of any kind. You have to start with Homer and the Bible. But Homer, whoever wrote these poems, would never have imagined that they would be read in books, which did not exist when he was writing these things, 3,000 years later. It never crossed his mind. That, I'm sure, never crossed his mind. And so, in these epics, he's not explaining himself to you at all. He's also not inventing anything except cute, sometimes gorgeous, little details and variations on stories that his listeners already knew. Which means that if you're coming to Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey cold, you need a bit of backgrounding. You probably don't 100% need it. I would think that if you just picked up the Iliad and started to read it in a pretty good translation, a translation that was more or less glossing as it went along, the kinds of things that you need to know, you'd probably be okay. And once the action and the drama really started in book 4, you'd definitely be okay. But you would enhance the reading experience a lot more if you knew all the things that Homer assumes you do. And for that, you need a primer on Greek mythology. And there are many. There are many such. I'm going to recommend my favorite, which is Edith Hamilton's Mythology. This has little bits and pieces on other things at the end, but it's mostly retellings of Greek myths, all of which were extant when Homer was writing the Iliad, was composing the Iliad and the Odyssey. All of these stories were already well known in their main bodies and also in many variations, and they are accepted as background in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So there's no such thing as spoiling ancient Greek literature. All of Greek literature was written under the assumption that the audience knew the story already. So if you don't sidle up to that assumption, you're going to be behind the eight ball. So I would argue, I put Homer first, but I would argue read this first. Familiarize yourself with the names and the outlines of these Greek mythological characters and the broad outlines of the Greek mythological stories, including the broad outline of the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey that Edith Hamilton gives in here. You're not spoiling anything to learn the shape and the importance of the important events of those poems. Then go back and read the things themselves, where you're not groping, where you're not feeling like jokes are being made behind your back. Those things, you can pick Edith Hamilton, you can pick any mythological handbook like this that you want, and read them in tandem. Allow a handbook on Greek mythology to inform you about all the players in the Iliad and the Odyssey, so that you can concentrate on the enormous human drama of the poems themselves. So we'll move on from there. Homer is where you start, but then you start to enter the world of ancient Greece as a reality, not mythology, although the ancient Greeks, the listeners of Homer, firmly believed that all those things existed, that all of those events happened, and not too long ago either. But you start there, but then you move on to the real-world examples, the real-world history of the ancient Greeks. These were actual men and women who lived and fought and died and left a significant body of literature. One of the first significant bodies of literature in the Western world. So now you want to move on to what the ancient Greeks themselves wrote. And that's going to be the bulk of this starter kit. And of course, when you get to that point, you start with two names. You start with Herodotus and Thucydides, both of whom wrote volumes of history, the first people, as far as we know, ever to do that. Herodotus, I have here the Penguin Classic. This is the Aubrey de Selincourt translation. Again, as with any translation, you want to pick the one that sits well with you. You will always be able to move on to other translations later. But for now, pick the one that sits well with you. I'm pretty sure the Aubrey de Selincourt will, but Tom Holland's translation is also very popular. And Thucydides also for the Penguin Classic, just because it's readily available. These two are different in their emphases, different in what they're talking about. I believe that they are the two essential personal approaches to history just in general. Are you reporting it, or are you telling it as the mother of all great bedtime stories? Which are you doing? Of course, the best historians do both at the same time. I believe that Herodotus does both at the same time, but he is not only considered the father of history, but of course the father of lies. So Thucydides has never been called that. Even I think there's far more conscious mendacity in Thucydides than there is in Herodotus. Thucydides, after all, had a dog in the fight. But either way, these two books are as foundational in their own way as the Iliad and the Odyssey. So you have to read both of them for your Greek starter kit. But they are contemporaneous, or more or less contemporaneous. We've lost most of the documents that Herodotus and Thucydides were consulting, and they had less of the benefit of hindsight than we do. So you should read modern histories of the stuff they're writing about. So I have two of those here. The first one is Donald Kagan's one-volume The Peloponnesian War, which of course has Thucydides looking over its shoulder, but it corrects, it enhances, it expands. When you're reading Thucydides, you will be conscious of his startling artistry. He is an amazing artist, even in a bad translation. You will see that, I think. But you will, while you're reading him, and the same thing is true 10 times over with Herodotus, be wondering, okay, but is he right about this? What does history say about this? What does actual history say about this? What do monuments say about this? What does archaeology say about this? So you're going to want to read these modern things. I chose the Kagan's Peloponnesian War for the one subject, and Peter Green's book, The Greco-Persian Wars, for the other. Both are really good. Peter Green is a terrifically engaging writer. Kagan is too. So you want to intersperse your starter kit. Your starter kit is mostly primary sources, the Greeks themselves in English language translation. But you want to intersperse that with histories, with historical approaches. So we're going to be doing that throughout. But then once we've done with Herodotus and Thucydides, we move on to another glory of the literature of ancient Greece, and that is the dramas, the plays. And there are 4 names. Now, again, I'm going to show you covers of all of these things, but you should just hunt around at your library, at your used bookstore, hunt around your whole life. Read as many translations as you can, or learn to read the original and dispense with the translations. But for translations, read as many as you can so that you get a sense of who agrees with you. So we want to start off with Aeschylus, the Oresteia. These are 3 plays. They are meant to be read. They're not meant to be read. They're meant to be experienced in conjunction. You're probably never going to get a chance to see the Oresteia on stage, but you will be very well served in reading this by having read Edith Hamilton's mythology or whatever primer on Greek mythology you're using, because these are all that. These are all workings and reworkings of common themes in Greek mythology. So any good translated edition, this is the Robert Fagles, will give you that in the introduction and the notes. Any good translation of any of these Greek dramatists will give you the mythological grounding that you need to understand those parts of the plays so that you can dispense with it and concentrate on the intense human drama. That's the only reason I keep mentioning it. The only reason I keep bringing it up is because I don't want you to feel like you came in late to a class. Nothing will kill the immediate emotional responses to these works faster than that. So you want to be up on the facts. You want to be up on the background. And Edith Hamilton will largely get you there with this. But you want to start with Aeschylus, and then you want to move on to Sophocles. And these are the 3 Theban plays. They are not a cycle like the Oresteia, but they are thematically obviously linked. And Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the King, was widely regarded even by the ancient Greeks themselves as pretty much a perfect dramatic presentation. Again, it's a terrible shame that you will probably never get a chance to see it on stage, but believe you me, it and Antigone, by our next author, have not lost any of their power to spellbind an audience. Not a bit of it, after all these centuries. So you want to read these. Again, this is the Fagles translation just because it was readily available on Penguin, but pick whatever translation you want to see which one you get along with. Because this is a little strange. You've got a very limited number of characters on stage speaking at any one time. You've got a chorus. You've got all sorts of mythological, cultural assumptions and also religious elements. So you want to take as much of that topspin off as possible for yourself. This is not a world of spoilers. That anything like that doesn't even touch on this. So don't even think about it. Just arm yourself with as much as you need to know. And you want to move on from there to Euripides. If you move in order from Aeschylus to Sophocles to Euripides, you will see innovations taking place in real time between the different plays. And believe you me, the audience is sitting on stone benches, on stone amphitheater seats, saw those innovations as well, and had all sorts of things to think and talk and write about them. This is the Green and Lattimore translation, but any translation of Euripides, that you try as many as you can and see what you like. And then you can follow those up, you can chase those out with our one prominent example of a comedic playwright from ancient Greece. There were plenty of them. But the one prominent example that we have is Aristophanes. And here you want to read, Lysistrata, certainly, but any volume of Aristophanes now will have 4 or 5 plays. Read them. Try your best to sense their humor. Humor is very perishable. Unless it's slapstick, it's very perishable. But again, any good translation, any good edition of Aristophanes will probably help you with the humor. It will probably fill in some of the context. Maybe not to the point of making you laugh. We run into the same problem centuries later with Shakespeare. So, go in forearmed with that and just go in for what it tells you. And then once we're done with Homer, and once we're done with an overview of Homer, and then you move to the ancient Greek historians, Herodotus and Thucydides, and you read contemporary books, contemporary histories about their historical subjects. Then you move on to the dramatists, who are more, and Aristophanes, more or less a world of their own. Next, I thought we would cover histories of ancient Greece in general, not just the particular subjects looked at by Herodotus and Thucydides and then enhanced by later historians, but a bit broader. So you have a few of those that we'll do. The first one is Bettany Hughes' book, The Hemlock Cup. Most of these things will concentrate a good deal on Pericles Athens. This is just so wonderfully done. It's so wonderfully readable that it really does demystify as it goes along. And so it's well worth it to look at the historical side of things. Of course, there's a more traditional version of that. The most traditional version of this, a workhorse of a history of ancient Greece. Still very much worth reading. The fold-out maps, the subheadings, the old world eloquence, and that is J.B. Bury. This is a modern library giant of his history of Greece, but this has been reprinted a million times. I don't know if it's in print at the moment, but endless copies of this modern library hardcover exist, with or without a dust jacket. Endless copies of them do. This is readily gettable. And it no offense to Bettany Hughes, but this was born of a world of scholarship and classical fluency that had long since vanished before Bettany Hughes was even born. So you are getting shadings here, an authorial voice here, that you won't get in later histories. So if you're really interested, this is very much worth your time to do. It is a classic of history writing. And while we're talking about history, I thought I'd mention another thing here. This is a series that I've mentioned before. It's not in print anymore, but they're invaluable. If you see them in your used bookstore, they really are invaluable. They aren't really meant to be read narratively. They have a much stronger visual component, but they are priceless for bringing history alive to you, and usually far more affordably than, for instance, the landmark editions of Herodotus or Thucydides that also will show you all sorts of physical details of the world, but they can be pricey, and they're big. And I'm talking about the Penguin Historical Atlas series. They did a whole bunch of these volumes. They're thin, they're intensely illustrated. They did one for ancient Greece. That you can kind of make out what they do from that picture on the cover. That picture on the cover is very much what the inside of the book looks like, and is meant to advertise that fact, because it shows you navigation routes, migration routes, the expansion and then contraction of certain city-states, the exact nature and location of wars on land and on sea, accompanied by very knowledgeable prose. So when you're looking at broader histories of ancient Greece, which you're going to have to do to set any of these things in context, you're going to have to do that, because the ancient Greeks were either fighting Athens against Sparta, or they were fighting all of them against Persia. This can be really, really helpful to have. Just have it on the shelf and consult it whenever anything comes up. It's not necessarily the same thing as Bury or Bettany Hughes, especially where you would want to read it. But I do advise having it if you're really interested in the subject. And then we can move on. This is utterly unavoidable when it comes to ancient Greece, or believe me, I would avoid it. That is philosophy. That is philosophy. And what philosophy is when the ancient Greeks did it, and they were the first to do it, is systematized thinking. Trying to make sense of the material world. So, in a sense, the ancient Greeks' philosophy is the deep soil from which later sprang the Enlightenment. And so you really do have to read the two towering philosophers of ancient Greece. And I would argue that, I have pictures here to show you, I would argue that the best way to do that is with a kind of greatest hits fat essentials volume. We've got it all in one book. You can buy it or borrow it in one place. You're not worried about extensively annotated scholarly editions of one slim little work. Instead, you have the whole of it in one shelf that you can look at and then decide where you want to go. So you've got the Essential Plato. This is the Jowett translation. with a Lawrence Alma-Tadema cover there. that is not a philosopher, but this is the Essential Plato. It's like 1,000 pages long. It will give you all the good stuff with a good introduction and good notes. A good place to start. Better than, whatever Penguin does now. I think Penguin does 10 volumes of Plato, 10 individual slim volumes. Better, I think, a big volume like this. And the same thing with the other Greek philosopher that you have to read, which is Aristotle. This is the Modern Library. It's a big, fat volume of Aristotle that is all of his landmark stuff that will give you the gist. And also, in both these cases, the introductions and the prefaces and whatnot make clear why these figures are important to read even now. What they were doing, I don't like how they've been fetishized in the last 2,000 years, or in the last specifically 70 years, but what they were doing, no one had ever done before. This kind of grappling with the world through your mind, and especially your pen, had never been done before, that we know of, that survives. And also in this close to a non-liturgical sense, which is also important. It is undeniably important, so you should familiarize yourself with these two for an ancient Greece starter kit. And then we'll finish this up with fiction, modern fiction, which can often capture essences really well. Modern historical fiction has been the introduction to history for any number of hundreds of thousands of people in the last 200 years in any number of different eras of history. I firmly believe that most of the historians out there working today, or were working in the 1960s or in the 1930s, came to their subjects through fiction. Whether they admitted it later in life when they had a beard down to here and 10 Oxford degrees is neither here nor there, but I believe that they did come that way. No matter what the era of fiction is, no matter what the era of history is. So I want to recommend two novels, both of which are really good on their own, but also that give you really good insights into the time period. And the first is Stephen Pressfield. This is his book, Gates of Fire, about the Battle of Thermopylae, which was immortalized in modern times, in modern memory, by Frank Miller, the comic book artist and writer, who did a graphic novel called 300 that was then adapted into a movie by Scott Snyder, a truly visually memorable movie that has now become memed up the wazoo. And this is Pressfield's novel on the same subject. It is tremendously good. So it'll do as a fictional portal. And then another, of course, when I'm talking about fiction dramatizing ancient Greece, I couldn't leave out Mary Renault, who did a great job. That was her main stock in trade. And I want to recommend The Last of the Wine. She's done a number of these things, 3 famous novels about Alexander the Great, and also a novel about a professional epic singer of the type who would have memorized and then sang chunks or even the whole of the Iliad and the Odyssey. She did one about a professional actor of the type who would have acted Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides. But this is more than either one of those. This is the main events of the time period of Periclean Athens, seen through the eyes of 2 well-to-do young men who lived through it all and are friends with Socrates and Plato and know firsthand the politics of Pericles or of any of the other major figures, and also the foreign powers. I don't mean to make it seem like a lesson. It's tremendously emotionally powerful, and it also reflects the rather healthy suspicion that most of the society's levels of ancient Greece held towards heterosexuality, which is kind of creepy. So they rightfully held it in suspicion. There are all sorts of social elements involved here that you won't get in any of the things that I've mentioned so far, but that were definitely part of ancient Greece. So this and Gates of Fire will help you there. And I think the modern edition, this is an old paperback of The Last of the Wine, but I'm pretty sure that a modern edition of The Last of the Wine and also the current edition of Gates of Fire will come with further reading sections that aren't fiction. So you'll be pointed at other historical sources. And there you go. So that is an ancient Greece starter kit. Good deal of work, but they're worth it. the ancient Greeks are worth it. We owe them almost everything. Everything that we don't owe to the Enlightenment, we owe to them. Except for the weird patina of the internet, and who knows how that's going to shake out. So you start with Homer, and in order to start with Homer, you have to start with a playbook for Homer, or you're going to be lost. So read a playbook on Homer. It doesn't have to be Edith Hamilton. It doesn't even have to be a book. It can be Wikipedia. But study a playbook first so that you know the players. Then read Homer. Then the great histories. Then modern versions of the great histories. Then the tragedians and Aristophanes. And then you can move on to broader histories of ancient Greece. Well, the ones that I've mentioned, there are plenty of others. But I recommend all of these. These are all really strong. You do have to deal with the philosophers. And you might want to reward yourself with some fiction. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.